started. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 3 of our read along together of Emma by Jane Austen. Today we have some longer chapters. We're only going to read 2 chapters today. So today we're going to read chapters 7 and 8. And I've officially made my little schedule for us to follow. So I now know for sure that we're going to end on Thursday, March the 11th. And I bring that day up because I'm going to start pouring out my tea. Hello, good to see you. I'm going to start pouring out my tea while I talk about this. My tea today is, oh gosh, what is this one? Today is the a Simply Organic Detox by Choice Organic Teas. It's a roasted dandelion root blend. It says it's good for detoxifying and digestion. And considering I had a super heavy lunch, I was like, anything I can do to help myself not fall asleep is a good thing right now. So having this one, let's see. Smells good. Hello, good to see you guys. So the reason I wanted to bring out the finishing on March 11th is because, as I mentioned on the very first day of our read along of Emma, this story has been adapted to stage stage and screen many times. And so I thought that this would be a fun one for us to show a screening of, and maybe try to watch it together and comment along as we go, if you're up to that. And so I put up 2 polls today in our group. I invite you to go ahead and answer the polls. The first poll is asking, when would you be available to watch a film? We're going to finish, as I said, on Thursday, March 11th. And so I posted a couple of different times on Friday, March 12th, and also on Saturday, March 13th. And I would say vote on as many times as you are available, because that way we'll figure out what's the time that's most popular, that the most people could attend, and that way we can schedule for that. I would love it if several of us could watch together and comment along. I just think that would be super fun. Hello. Let's see. Then the other poll is to determine which film we want to show. Again, as I said, there's been a lot of great adaptations. I feel like I saw the 1996 Gwyneth Paltrow version. I don't remember the details, but I remember liking it. I also remember loving the 1995 Clueless with Alicia Silverstone, and that one is a more modern, although I hesitate now to say modern since it's from 1995, which makes it 26 years ago. Oh, getting old. But a more modern than this. And so there's also that adaptation. Plus, there was a brand new one that came out just last year. That one I haven't seen, and because it just came out last year, I suspect that many of us have not seen it. So I gave you 3 different choices. Please vote on what you would most like to see. If you really can't decide between 2, go ahead and vote on 2. But please don't vote on all 3, because then, it's all of them. It doesn't really help to narrow it down. Next Monday, I'm going to choose our pick as to what day and which film, and I'll go ahead and send that to the movie licensing company so I can start getting the agreement set up so that we have permission legally to show that film to you guys. But I think it'll be really fun for us to watch a film together. And if it turns out not to be, we won't do it again. It'll just be this one. But if it does turn out to be a really neat experience, maybe we can start when there's a film available that's covered by our licensing agreement, maybe we can start showing an adaptation at the end of each of our readings. I think that'd be kind of fun too. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what happened in yesterday's 3 chapters of Emma. And again, please, when you get a chance, when you're done, or if you don't want to listen to me do the recap, go in and vote. Preferably when we're done doing our reading today. All right, so chapters 4, 5, and 6. In chapter 4, the main thrust of that chapter was that Emma and Harriet Smith were furthering their acquaintance, and that Emma was quite impressed with the gentility of Harriet and how she's going to help her become a better person. Clearly, even so, she is the illegitimate child of somebody who had enough money to send her to a boarding school. She doesn't know who her birth parents are. And Emma's like, well, you're not really like one of them, one of the peasants. You are a gentlewoman, even though you don't have the name and the rank. And so she finds out that Harriet is quite friendly with the Martin family. In fact, she had just gone on vacation with the Martins before she met Emma. And she went to school with the sisters, Martin, but she also has gotten to know Mr. Robert Martin, the brother of the young ladies with whom she went to school. And there's a bit of a flirtation there. And Emma does her best in that chapter to totally discourage it. She's like, well, he's a farmer. That's below you. And he doesn't really think about you that much. He didn't get the book that you recommended, like the novel. Instead, he was doing work. Oh, he's always going to think about farming and business instead of you, and you really don't want him. And now that you've seen real gentlemen like Mr. Knightley or Mr. Elton, Why would you want him? And so Emma is really disparaging to Mr. Martin, who we know lives near Mr. Knightley's estate. So Emma does her best to plant seeds of discord between the two of them. They actually run into Mr. Martin, and Emma just sort of says like, oh, well, he's the kind of guy I don't even notice. He's not so poor that I'd be charitable with him, and he's not wealthy enough that I'd be at all interested in noticing him myself. And so Emma's really dismissive and scornful, and when Harriet sees that, she also starts to pull back a little bit from the relationship as friends, or perhaps more with Robert Martin. So that's Emma meddling in Harriet's affairs. Then in chapter 5, there's sort of another look at that relationship of Harriet and Emma, where Mr. Knightley and Mrs. Weston are observed speaking with each other. And Mr. Knightley basically says, I don't think that's a good relationship for Emma, because Harriet is in a position where she looks up to Emma so much, both because she's a gentlewoman, because she's better educated, because she's wealthy, all these different things. She looks up to Emma so much that Emma can't help but to feel even more superior. And Emma is an intelligent young woman. She's a kind young woman. She's beautiful, all these great things. But Emma also is a little bit lazy. Sometimes she doesn't follow through on the things that she begins. And with by having Harriet look up to her so much, it doesn't help Emma to become a better person. Emma instead is so satisfied with who she is that she has no incentive to improve herself. And that's what Mr. Knightley's argument basically is, that Emma is, Emma's a good person. Emma's beautiful, Emma's kind, Emma's sweet, Emma's intelligent. But she won't push herself. And in fact, the relationship with Harriet, he feels, will cause her to hesitate to say be indulgent, but it won't help her be a better person. Let's just leave it at that. And if any of you have comments too about how you want to express that a little better, I would love to hear what you say too. But that's my interpretation of it. And Mrs. Weston basically says, no, Emma is a good girl, and this is a good thing for her too. It will help her to learn more by trying to help Harriet to learn more, that she will herself improve. And he also mentions too, there's a little kind of exchange where he says something like, it would do her good to fall in love with somebody, because it seems like Emma's never really been in love with someone, and she's said often she has no wish to marry. She's basically run her father's estate since her mother died when she was a young child, and that and she was so much more intelligent even than her elder sister Isabella, who has married the brother of Mr. Knightley. Mr. Knightley says, it would do her good. Let's see. It would not be a bad thing for her to be very much in love with a proper object. I should like to see Emma in love, and in some doubt of a return. It would do her good. But there is nobody hereabouts to attach her, and she goes so seldom from home. And Mrs. Weston just says, oh yes, there does indeed seem so little to tempt her to break her resolution at present. And then later on, there's just a little mention of, she and Mr. Weston have discussed the possibility. So we'll see where that leads. Finally, chapter 6 that we read was Emma trying to further the possibility of a relationship between Harriet Smith and Mr. Elton, who is the vicar or person. I'm not sure exactly what his title is, but he lives at the vicarage. Mr. Elton is a youngish man. He's in his mid-20s, and he has a bit of money of his own, but he's not super wealthy. And so Emma thinks that he could be a good potential match for Harriet, and he has admired Harriet's looks. And so there's a long scene where Emma mentions how, Harriet is so beautiful. I would like to draw her portrait. And Mr. Elton says, why, yes, you absolutely should draw her portrait. And so she's telling herself, aha, he is interested in Harriet. He wants a portrait of Harriet. I will oblige him and her by creating this portrait of Harriet for him to be able to enjoy. He, of course, comes back to each of the sittings, and he is always watching and observing closely as Emma's drawing this portrait of Harriet. By the time the portrait is done, which is one of the rare things that Emma actually bothers to finish, because it's part of this matchmaking ploy, he agrees to take it with him to London, and that he's going to get it framed. And Emma makes a point of thinking to herself, that man is almost too gallant to be in love. I should say so, but that I suppose there may be 100 different ways of being in love. He is an excellent young man and will suit Harriet exactly. But then he also thinks to herself, but he does sigh and languish, and study for compliments rather more than I could endure as a principal. I come in for a pretty good share as a second, but it is his gratitude on Harriet's account. So Emma tells herself, seeing his behavior, she herself wouldn't want him, but he'd be good for Harriet, and that, she'll do what she can to help out. All right, so that's what we finished with yesterday. If I missed anything vital, please go ahead and share it in the comments. So as we continue on, anyone who missed yesterday or didn't perhaps catch any of the nuances, we can move on together. All right, so now today we're going to read just two chapters, chapters 7 and 8 of Emma by Jane Austen. Chapter 7. The very day of Mr Elton's going to London produced a fresh occasion for Emma's services towards her friend. Harriet had been at Hartfield, as usual, soon after breakfast, and after a time had gone home to return again to dinner. She returned, and sooner than had been talked of, and with an agitated, hurried look, announcing something extraordinary to have happened which she was longing to tell. Half a minute brought it all out. She had heard, as soon as she got back to Mrs Goddard's, that Mr Martin had been there an hour before, and finding she was not at home, nor particularly expected, had left a little parcel for her from one of his sisters, and gone away. And on opening this parcel, she had actually found, besides the 2 songs which she had lent Elizabeth to copy, a letter to herself. And this letter was from him, from Mr Martin, and contained a direct proposal of marriage. Who could have thought it? She was so surprised she did not know what to do. Yes, quite a proposal of marriage, and a very good letter, at least she thought so, and he wrote as if he really loved her very much, but she did not know, and so she was come as fast as she could to ask Miss Woodhouse what she should do. Emma was half ashamed of her friend for seeming so pleased and so doubtful. Upon my word, she cried, the young man is determined not to lose anything for want of asking. He will connect himself well if he can. Will you read the letter? Cried Harriet. Pray do. I'd rather you would. Emma was not sorry to be pressed. She read, and was surprised. The style of the letter was much above her expectation. There were not merely no grammatical errors, but as a composition it would not have disgraced a gentleman. The language, though plain, was strong and unaffected, and the sentiments it conveyed very much to the credit of the writer. It was short, but expressed good sense, warm attachment, liberality, propriety, even delicacy of feeling. She paused over it, while Harriet stood anxiously watching for her opinion, with a well, and was at last forced to add, is it a good letter, or is it too short? Yes, indeed, a very good letter, replied Emma rather slowly. So good a letter, Harriet, that, everything considered, I think one of his sisters must have helped him. I can hardly imagine the young man whom I saw talking with you the other day could express himself so well, if left quite to his own powers, and yet it is not the style of a woman. No, certainly it is too strong and concise, not diffuse enough for a woman. No doubt he is a sensible man, and I suppose may have a natural talent for, thinks strongly and clearly, and when he takes a pen in hand, his thoughts naturally find proper words. It is so with some men. Yes, I understand the sort of mind. Vigorous, decided, with sentiments to a certain point, not coarse. A better written letter, Harriet, returning it, than I had expected. Well, said the still waiting Harriet, well, and what shall I do? What shall you do? In what respect? Do you mean with regard to this letter? Yes. But what are you in doubt of? You must answer it, of course, and speedily. Yes, but what shall I say? Dear Miss Woodhouse, do advise me. Oh, no, no. The letter had much better be all your own. You will express yourself very properly, I am sure. There is no danger of your not being intelligible, which is the first thing. Your meaning must be unequivocal, no doubts or demurs, and such expressions of gratitude and concern for the pain you are inflicting as propriety requires will present themselves unbidden to your mind, I am persuaded. You need not be prompted to write with the appearance of sorrow for his disappointment. You think I ought to refuse him, then? Said Harriet, looking down. Ought to refuse him? My dear Harriet, what do you mean? Are you in any doubt as to that? I thought, but I beg your pardon. Perhaps I have been under a mistake. I certainly have been misunderstanding you, if you feel in doubt as to the purport of your answer. I had imagined you were consulting me only as to the wording of it. Harriet was silent. With a little reserve of manner, Emma continued, You mean to return a favorable answer, I collect. No, I do not. That is, I do not mean... What shall I do? What would you advise me to do? Pray, dear Miss Woodhouse, tell me what I ought to do. I shall not give you any advice, Harriet. I will have nothing to do with it. This is a point which you must settle with your own feelings. I had no notion that he liked me so very much, said Harriet, contemplating the letter. For a little while Emma persevered in her silence, but beginning to apprehend the bewitching flattery of that letter might be too powerful, she thought it best to say, I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts as to whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. If she can hesitate as to yes, she ought to say no directly. It is not a state to be safely entered into with doubtful feelings, with half a heart. I thought it my duty as a friend, and older than yourself, to say thus much to you. But do not imagine that I want to influence you. Oh, no, I am sure you are a great deal too kind to... But if you would just advise me what I had best do... No, I do not mean that. As you say, one's mind ought to be quite made up. One should not be hesitating. It is a very serious thing. It will be safer to say no, perhaps. Do you think I had better say no? Not for the world, said Emma, smiling graciously, would I advise you either way. You must be the best judge of your own happiness. If you prefer Mr. Martin to every other person, if you think him the most agreeable man you have ever been in company with, why should you hesitate? You blush, Harriet. Does anybody else occur to you at this moment under such a definition? Harriet, do not deceive yourself. Do not be run away with by gratitude and compassion. At this moment, whom are you thinking of? The symptoms were favorable. Instead of answering, Harriet turned away, confused, and stood thoughtfully by the fire. And though the letter was still in her hand, it was now mechanically twisted about without regard. Emma waited the result with impatience, but not without strong hopes. At last, with some hesitation, Harriet said, Miss Woodhouse, as you will not give me your opinion, I must do as well as I can by myself, and I have now quite determined, and really almost made up my mind, to refuse Mr. Martin. Do you think I am right? Perfectly right, my dearest Harriet. You are doing just what you ought. While you were at all in suspense, I kept my feelings to myself, but now that you are so completely decided, I have no hesitation in approving. Dear Harriet, I give myself joy of this. It would have grieved me to lose your acquaintance, which must have been the consequence of your marrying Mr. Martin. While you were in the smallest degree wavering, I said nothing about it, because I would not influence, but it would have been the loss of a friend to me. I could not have visited Mrs. Robert Martin of Abbey Mill Farm. Now I am secure of you forever. Harriet had not surmised her own danger, but the idea of it struck her forcibly. You could not have visited me? She cried, looking aghast. No, To be sure you could not, but I never thought of that before. That would have been too dreadful. What an escape! Dear Miss Woodhouse, I would not give up the pleasure and honor of being intimate with you for anything in the world. Indeed, Harriet, it would have been a severe pang to lose you, but it must have been. You would have thrown yourself out of all good society. I must have given you up. Dear me, how should I ever have borne it? It would have killed me never to come to Hartfield any more. Dear affectionate creature, you banished to Abbey Mill Farm, you confined to the society of the illiterate and vulgar all your life? I wonder how the young man could have the assurance to ask it. He must have a pretty good opinion of himself. I do not think he is conceited either, in general, said Harriet, her conscience opposing such censure. At least, he is very good-natured, and I shall always feel much obliged to him, and have a great regard for... But that is quite a different thing from... And you know, though he may like me, it does not follow that I should. And certainly I must confess that since my visiting here, I have seen people... And if one comes to compare them, person and manners, there is no comparison at all. One is so very handsome and agreeable. However, I do really think Mr. Martin a very amiable young man, and have a great opinion of him. And his being so much attached to me, and his writing such a letter... But as to leaving you, it is what I would not do upon any consideration. Thank you, my own sweet little friend. We will not be parted. A woman is not to marry a man merely because she is asked, or because he is attached to her and can write a tolerable letter. Oh, no. And it is but a short letter, too. Emma felt the bad taste of her friend, but let it pass with a very true, and it would be a small consolation to her, for the clownish manner which might be offending her every hour of the day, to know that her husband could write a good letter. Oh, yes, very. Nobody cares for a letter. The thing is, to be always happy with pleasant companions. I am quite determined to refuse him. But how shall I do? What shall I say? Emma assured her there would be no difficulty in the answer, and advised its being written directly, which was agreed to in the hope of her assistance. And though Emma continued to protest against any assistance being wanted, it was in fact given in the formation of every sentence. The looking over his letter again, in replying to it, had such a softening tendency that it was particularly necessary to brace her up with a few decisive expressions, and she was so very much concerned at the idea of making him unhappy, and thought so much of what his mother and sisters would think and say, and was so anxious that they should not fancy her ungrateful, that Emma believed if the young man had come in her way at that moment, he would have been accepted after all. This letter, however, was written and sealed and sent. The business was finished, and Harriet safe. She was rather low all the evening, but Emma could allow for her amiable regrets, and sometimes relieve them by speaking of her own affection, sometimes by bringing forward the idea of Mr. Elton. I shall never be invited to Abbey Mill again, was said in rather a sorrowful tone. Nor if you were, could I ever bear to part with you, my Harriet. You are a great deal too necessary at Hartfield to be spared to Abbey Mill. And I am sure I should never want to go there, for I am never happy but at Hartfield. Some time afterwards it was, I think Mrs. Goddard would be very much surprised if she knew what had happened. I am sure Miss Nash would, for Miss Nash thinks her own sister very well married, and it is only a linen draper. One should be sorry to see greater pride or refinement in the teacher of a school, Harriet. I dare say Miss Nash would envy you such an opportunity as this of being married. Even this conquest would appear valuable in in her eyes. As to anything superior for you, I suppose she is quite in the dark. The attentions of a certain person can hardly be among the tittle-tattle of Highbury yet. Hitherto, I fancy you and I are the only people to whom his looks and manners have explained themselves." Harriet blushed and smiled, and said something about wondering that people should like her so much. The idea of Mr Elton was certainly cheering, but still, after a time, she was tender-hearted again towards the rejected Mr Martin. "Now he has got my letter," said she softly. "I wonder what they are all doing, whether his sisters know. If he is unhappy, they will be unhappy too. I hope he will not mind it so very much." Let us think of those among our absent friends who are more cheerfully employed," cried Emma. "At this moment, perhaps, Mr Elton is showing your picture to his mother and sisters, telling how much more beautiful is the original, and after being asked for it 5 or 6 times, allowing them to hear your name, your own dear name." "My picture? But he has left my picture in Bond Street." "Has he so? Then I know nothing of Mr Elton. No, my dear little modest Harriet, depend upon it the picture will not be in Bond Street till just before he mounts his horse tomorrow. It is his companion all this evening, his solace, his delight. It opens his designs to the family, it introduces you among them, it diffuses through the party those pleasantest feelings of our nature, eager curiosity and warm prepossession. How cheerful, how animated, how suspicious, how busy their imaginations all are." Harriet smiled again, and her smiles grew stronger. And now chapter 8. Harriet slept at Hartfield that night. For some weeks past she had been spending more than half her time there, and gradually getting to have a bedroom appropriated to herself, and Emma judged it best in every respect, safest and kindest, to keep her with them as much as possible just at present. She was obliged to go the next morning for an hour or two to Mrs Goddard's, but it was then to be settled that she should return to Hartfield to make a regular visit of some days. While she was gone, Mr Knightley called, and sat some time with Mr Woodhouse and Emma, till Mr Woodhouse, who had previously made up his mind to walk out, was persuaded by his daughter not to defer it, and was induced by the entreaties of both, though against the scruples of his own civility, to leave Mr Knightley for that purpose. Mr Knightley, who had nothing of ceremony about him, was offering by his short, decided answers an amusing contrast to the protracted apologies and civil hesitation of the other. "Well, I believe, if you will excuse me, Mr Knightley, if you will not consider me as doing a very rude thing, I shall take Emma's advice and go out for a quarter of an hour. As the sun is out, I believe I had better take my 3 turns while I can. I treat you without ceremony, Mr Knightley. We invalids think we are privileged people. My dear sir, do not make a stranger of me. I leave an excellent substitute in my daughter. Emma will be happy to entertain you, and therefore I think I will beg your excuse and take my 3 turns, my winter walk." "You cannot do better, sir." "I would ask for the pleasure of your company, Mr Knightley, but I am a very slow walker, and my pace would be tedious to you. And besides, you have another long walk before you to Donwell Abbey." "Thank you, sir, thank you. I am going this moment myself, and I think the sooner you go the better. I will fetch your greatcoat and open the garden door for you." Mr Woodhouse at last was off, but Mr Knightley, instead of being immediately off likewise, sat down again, seemingly inclined for more chat. He began speaking of Harriet, and speaking of her with more voluntary praise than Emma had ever heard before. "I cannot rate her beauty as you do," said he, "but she is a pretty little creature, and I am inclined to think very well of her disposition. Her character depends upon those she is with, but in good hands she will turn out a valuable woman." "I am glad you think so, and the good hands, I hope, may not be wanting." "Come," said he, "you are anxious for a compliment, so I will tell you that you have improved her. You have cured her of her schoolgirl's giggle. She really does you credit." "Thank you. I should be mortified indeed if I did not believe I had been of some use, but it is not everybody who will bestow praise where they may. You do not often overpower me with it. You are expecting her again, you say, this morning? Almost every moment. She has been gone longer than she intended. Something has happened to delay her. Some visitors, perhaps. Highbury gossips? Tiresome wenches. Harriet may not consider everybody tiresome that you would. Emma knew this was too true for contradiction, and therefore said nothing. He presently added with a smile, I do not pretend to fix on times or places, but I must tell you that I have good reason to believe your little friend will soon hear of something to her advantage. Indeed? How so? Of what sort? A very serious sort, I assure you, still smiling. Very serious. I can think of but one thing. Who is in love with her? Who makes you their confidant? Emma was more than half in hopes of Mr Elton's having dropped a hint. Mr Knightley was a sort of general friend and adviser, and she knew Mr Elton looked up to him. I have reason to think, he replied, that Harriet Smith will soon have an offer of marriage, and from a most unexceptionable quarter. Robert Martin is the man. Her visit to Abbey Mill this summer seems to have done his business. He is desperately in love and means to marry her. He is very obliging, said Emma, but is he sure that Harriet means to marry him? Well, well, means to make her an offer then. Will that do? He came to the Abbey 2 evenings ago on purpose to consult me about it. He knows I have a thorough regard for him and all his family, and I believe considers me as one of his best friends. He came to ask me whether I thought it would be imprudent in him to settle so early, whether I thought her too young. In short, whether I approved his choice altogether, having some apprehension perhaps of her being considered, especially since you're making so much of her, as in a line of society above him. I was very much pleased with all that he said. I never hear better sense from anyone than Robert Martin. He always speaks to the purpose, open, straightforward, and very well judging. He told me everything, his circumstances and plans, and what they all propose doing in the event of his marriage. He is an excellent young man, both as son and brother. I had no hesitation in advising him to marry. He proved to me that he could afford it, and that being the case, I was convinced he could not do better. I praised the fair lady too, and altogether sent him away very happy. If he had never esteemed my opinion before, he would have thought highly of me then, and I dare say left the house thinking me the best friend and counsellor man ever had. This happened the night before last. Now, as we may fairly suppose, he would not allow much time to pass before he spoke to the lady, and as he does not appear to have spoken yesterday, it is not unlikely that he should be at Mrs Goddard's to-day, and she may be detained by a visitor without thinking him at all a tiresome wretch. Pray, Mr Knightley, said Emma, who had been smiling to herself through a great part of the speech, how do you know that Mr Martin did not speak yesterday? Certainly, replied he, surprised. I do not absolutely know it, but it may be inferred. Was not she the whole day with you? Come, said she, I will tell you something in return for what you have told me. He did speak yesterday. That is, he wrote and was refused. This was obliged to be repeated before it could be believed, and Mr Knightley actually looked red with surprise and displeasure as he stood up in tall indignation and said, Then she is a greater simpleton than I ever believed her. What is the foolish girl about? Oh, to be sure, cried Emma. It is always incomprehensible to a man that a woman should ever refuse an offer of marriage. A man always imagines a woman to be ready for anybody who asks her. Nonsense. A man does not imagine any such thing. But what is the meaning of this? Harriet Smith refused Robert Martin? Madness, if it is so. But I hope you are mistaken. I saw her answer. Nothing could be clearer. You saw her answer? You wrote her answer, too. Emma, this is your doing. You persuaded her to refuse him. And if I did, which, however, I am far from allowing, I should not feel that I had done wrong. Mr. Martin is a very respectable young man, but I cannot admit him to be Harriet's equal, and am rather surprised indeed that he should have ventured to address her. By your account, he does seem to have had some scruples. It is a pity that they were ever got over. Not Harriet's equal, exclaimed Mr. Knightley loudly and warmly, and with calmer asperity added a few moments afterwards, no, he is not her equal indeed, for he is as much her superior in sense as in station. Emma, your infatuation about that girl blinds you. What are Harriet Smith's claims, either of birth, nature, or education, to any connection higher than Robert Martin? She is the natural daughter of nobody knows whom, with probably no settled provision at all, and certainly no respectable relations. She is known only as parlor boarder at a common school. She is not a sensible girl, nor a girl of any information. She has been taught nothing useful, and is too young and too simple to have acquired anything herself. At her age she can have no experience, and with her little wit is not very likely ever to have any that can avail her. She is pretty, and she is good-tempered, and that is all. My only scruple in advising the match was on his account, as being beneath his deserts, and a bad connection for him. I felt that as to fortune, in all probability he might do much better, and that as to a rational companion or useful helpmate, he could not do worse. But I could not reason so to a man in love, and was willing to trust that there being no harm in her, to her having that sort of disposition, which, in good hands like his, might be easily led aright and turn out very well. The advantage of the match I felt to be all on her side, and had not the smallest doubt, nor have I now, that there would be a general cry out upon her extreme good luck. Even your satisfaction I made sure of. It crossed my mind immediately that you would not regret your friend's leaving Highbury for the sake of her being settled so well. I remember saying to myself, even Emma, with all her partiality for Harriet, will think this a good match. I cannot help wondering at your knowing so little of Emma as to say any such thing. What? Think of Farmer, and with all his sense and all his merit, Mr. Martin is nothing more. A good match for my intimate friend, not having her leaving Highbury for the sake of marrying a man whom I could never admit as an acquaintance of my own. I wonder you should think it possible for me to have such feelings. I assure you mine are very different. I must think your statement by no means fair. You are not just to Harriet's claims. They would be estimated very differently by others as well as myself. Mr. Martin may be the richest of the two, but he is undoubtedly her inferior as to rank in society. The sphere in which she moves is much above his. It would be a degradation to illegitimacy and ignorance to be married to a respectable, intelligent gentleman farmer. As to the circumstances of her birth, though in a legal sense she may be called nobody, it will not hold in common sense. She is not to pay for the offense of others, of being held below the level of those with whom she is brought up. There can scarcely be a doubt that her father is a gentleman, and a gentleman of fortune. Her allowance is very liberal. Nothing has ever been grudged for her improvement or comfort. That she is a gentleman's daughter is indubitable to me. That she associates with gentlemen's daughters, no one, I apprehend, will deny. She is superior to Mr. Robert Martin. Whoever might be her parents, said Mr. Knightley, whoever may have had the charge of her, it does not appear to have been any part of their plan to introduce her into what you would call good society. After receiving a very indifferent education, she is left in Mrs. Goddard's hands to shift as she can, to move, in short, in Mrs. Goddard's line, to have Mrs. Goddard's acquaintance. Her friends evidently thought this was good enough for her, and it was good enough. She desired nothing better herself. Till you chose to turn her into a friend, her mind had no distaste for her own set, nor any ambition beyond it. She was as happy as possible with the Martins in the summer. She had no sense of superiority then. If she has it now, you have given it. You have been no friend to Harriet Smith, Emma. Robert Martin would never have proceeded so far if he had not felt persuaded of her not being disinclined to him. I know him well. He has too much real feeling to address any woman on the haphazard of selfish passion. And as to conceit, he is the farthest from it of any man I know. Depend upon it, he had encouragement. It was most convenient to Emma not to make a direct reply to this assertion. She chose rather to take up her own line of the subject again. You are a very warm friend to Mr. Martin, but as I said before, are unjust to Harriet. Harriet's claims to marry well are not so contemptible as you represent them. She is not a clever girl, but she has better sense than you are aware of, and does not deserve to have her understanding spoken of so slightingly. Waiving that point, however, and supposing her to be, as you describe, only pretty and good-natured, let me tell you that in the degree she possesses them, they are not trivial recommendations to the world in general, for she is, in fact, a beautiful girl, and must be thought so by 99 people out of 100. Until it appears that men are much more philosophic on the subject of beauty than they are generally supposed, till they do fall in love with well-informed minds instead of handsome faces, a girl with such loveliness as Harriet has a certainty of being admired and sought after, of having the power of choosing from among many, consequently a claim to be nice. Her good nature, too, is not so very slight a claim, comprehending, as it does, real, thorough sweetness of temper and manner, a very humble opinion of herself, and a great readiness to be pleased with other people. I am very much mistaken if your sex in general would not think such beauty and such temper the highest claims a woman could possess. Upon my word, Emma, to hear you abusing the reason you have is almost enough to make me think so too. Better to be without sense than misapply it as you do. To be sure, cried she playfully, I know that is the feeling of you all. I know that such a girl as Harriet is exactly what every man delights in, what at once bewitches his senses and satisfies his judgment. Oh, Harriet may pick and choose. Were you yourself ever to marry, she is the very woman for you. And is she at 17 just entering into life, just beginning to be known, to be wondered at because she does not accept the first offer she receives? No. Pray, let her have time to look about her. I have always thought it a very foolish intimacy, said Mr. Knightley presently, though I have kept my thoughts to myself. But I now perceive that it will be a very unfortunate one for Harriet. You will puff her up with such ideas of her own beauty and of what she has a claim to that, in a little while, nobody within her reach will be good enough for her. Vanity working on a weak head produces every sort of mischief. Nothing so easy as for a young lady to raise her expectations too high. Miss Harriet Smith may not find offers of marriage flow in so fast, though she is a very pretty girl. Men of sense, whatever you may choose to say, do not want silly wives. Men of family would not be so very fond of connecting themselves with a girl of such obscurity, and most prudent men would be afraid of the inconvenience and disgrace they might be involved in when the mystery of her parentage came to be revealed. Let her marry Robert Martin, and she is safe, respectable, and happy forever. But if you encourage her to expect to marry gently, and teach her to be satisfied with nothing less than a man of consequence and large fortune, she may be a parlor boarder at Mrs. Goddard's all the rest of her life. Or at least, for Harriet Smith is a girl who will marry somebody or other, till she grow desperate, and is glad to catch at the old writing master's son. We think so very differently on this point, Mr. Knightley, that there can be no use in canvassing it. We shall only be making each other more angry. But as to my letting her marry Robert Martin, it is impossible. She has refused him, and so decidedly, I think, as must prevent any second application. She must abide by the evil of having refused him, whatever it may be. And as to the refusal itself, I will not pretend to say that I might not influence her a little, but I assure you that there was very little for me or for anybody to do. His appearance is so much against him, and his manners so bad, that if she ever were indisposed to favor him, she is not now. I can imagine that before she had seen anybody superior, she might tolerate him. He was the brother of her friends, and he took pains to please her, and altogether, having seen nobody better, that must have been his great assistant, she might not, while she was at Abbey Mill, find him disagreeable. But the case is altered now. She knows now what gentlemen are, and nothing but a gentleman in education and manner has any chance with Harriet. Nonsense, arrant nonsense, as ever was talked, cried Mr. Knightley. Robert Martin's manners have sense, sincerity, and good humour to recommend them, and his mind has more true gentility than Harriet Smith could understand. Emma made no answer, and tried to look cheerfully unconcerned, but was really feeling uncomfortable, and wanting him very much to be gone. She did not repent what she had done. She still thought herself a better judge of such a point of female right and refinement than he could be. But yet she had a sort of habitual respect for his judgment in general, which made her dislike having it so loudly against her. And to have him sitting just opposite to her in angry state was very disagreeable. Some minutes passed in this unpleasant silence, with only one attempt on Emma's side to talk of the weather, but he made no answer. He was thinking. The result of his thoughts appeared at last in these words: Robert Martin has no great loss, if he can but think so, and I hope it will not be long before he does. Your views for Harriet are best known to yourself, but as you make no secret of your love of matchmaking, it is fair to suppose that views and plans and projects you have. And as a friend, I shall just hint to you that if Elton is the man, I think it will be all labor in vain. Emma laughed and disclaimed. He continued, Depend upon it, Elton will not do. Elton is a very good sort of man, and a very respectable vicar of Highbury, but not at all likely to make an imprudent match. He knows the value of a good income as well as anybody. Elton may talk sentimentally, but he will act rationally. He is as well acquainted with his own claims as you can be with Harriet's. He knows that he is a very handsome young man, and a great favourite wherever he goes, and from his general way of talking in unreserved moments, when there are only men present, I am convinced that he does not mean to throw himself away. I have heard him speak with great animation of a large family of young ladies that his sisters are intimate with, who have all £20,000 apiece. I am very much obliged to you, said Emma, laughing again. If I had set my heart on Mr. Elton's marrying Harriet, it would have been very kind to open my eyes. But at present I only want to keep Harriet to myself. I have done with matchmaking indeed. I could never hope to equal my own doings at Randalls. I shall leave off while I am well. Good morning to you, said he, rising and walking off abruptly. He was very much vexed. He felt the disappointment of the young man, and was mortified to have been the means of promoting it by the sanction he had given, and the part which he was persuaded Emma had taken in the affair was provoking him exceedingly. Emma remained in a state of vexation too, but there was more indistinctness in the causes of hers than in his. She did not always feel so absolutely satisfied herself, so entirely convinced that her opinions were right and her adversaries wrong, as Mr. Knightley. He walked off in more complete self-approbation than he left for her. She was not so materially cast down, however, but that a little time and the return of Harriet were very adequate restoratives. Harriet staying away so long was beginning to make her uneasy. The possibility of the young man's coming to Mrs. Goddard's that morning and meeting with Harriet and pleading his own cause gave alarming ideas. The dread of such a failure after all became the prominent uneasiness, and when Harriet appeared, and in very good spirits, and without having any such reason to give for her long absence, she felt a satisfaction which settled her with her own mind, and convinced her that, let Mr. Knightley think or say what he would, she had done nothing which woman's friendship and woman's feelings would not justify. He had frightened her a little about Mr. Elton, But when she considered that Mr. Knightley could not have observed him as she had done, neither with the interest nor, she must be allowed to tell herself, in spite of Mr. Knightley's pretensions, with the skill of such an observer on such a question as herself, that he had spoken it hastily and in anger, she was able to believe that he had rather said what he wished resentfully to be true than what he knew anything about. He certainly might have heard Mr. Elton speak with more unreserve than she had ever done, and Mr. Elton might not be of an imprudent and considerate disposition as to money matters. He might naturally be rather attentive than otherwise to them. But then Mr. Knightley did not make due allowance for the influence of a strong passion at war with all interested motives. Mr. Knightley saw no such passion, and of course thought nothing of its effects. But she saw too much of it to feel a doubt of its overcoming any hesitations that a reasonable prudence might originally suggest. And more than a reasonable, becoming degree of prudence, she was very sure did not belong to Mr. Elton. Harriet's cheerful look and manner established hers. She came back, not to think of Mr. Martin, but to talk of Mr. Elton. Miss Nash had been telling her something, which she repeated immediately with great delight. Mr. Perry had been to Mrs. Goddard's to attend a sick child, and Miss Nash had seen him, and he had told Miss Nash that as he was coming back yesterday from Clayton Park, he had met Mr. Elton, and found to his great surprise that Mr. Elton was actually on his road to London, and not meaning to return till the morrow, though it was the whist club night, which he had never been known to miss before. And Mr. Perry had remonstrated with him about it, and told him how shabby it was in him, their best player, to absent himself, and tried very much to persuade him to put off his journey only one day, but it would not do. Mr. Elton had been determined to go on, and had said in a very particular way indeed that he was going on business which he would not put off for any inducement in the world, and something about a very enviable commission, and being the bearer of something exceedingly precious. Mr. Perry could not quite understand him, but he was very sure there must be a lady in the case, and he told him so. And Mr. Elton only looked very conscious and smiling, and rode off in great spirits. Miss Nash had told her all this, and had talked a great deal more about Mr. Elton, and said, looking so very significantly at her, that she did not pretend to understand what his business might be, but she only knew that any woman whom Mr. Elton could prefer, she should think the luckiest woman in the world, for beyond a doubt Mr. Elton had not his equal for beauty or agreeableness. Well, on that happy note, we will end our read-along today. Next week, we're going to, let's see, we've got a bunch of chapters next week. But before we start thinking about next week, please, please, please go ahead and vote in our polls, both as to what day would be a better day to watch a film, if you're interested in watching a film together with our group, and also which of the 3 Emma adaptations covered by our licensing agreement you might be interested in watching. So thank you very much. Again, vote for as many of the times that you're available and could watch a film with us, and vote for up to 2 of the film adaptations. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll make that announcement on Monday as to which one we're going to pursue. And I will see you then for more Read Along Together with Emma. Take care. Bye. Oh, today's only Wednesday.